The storm raged as Ava clutched the worn-out envelope, her fingers trembling. Inside it lay the final letter from her father, a man she barely knew, but whose absence had shaped her life in ways she had never understood. The ink on the envelope was smudged, the paper softened at the edges as if it had been held many times before reaching her hands. The return address belonged to a place she had never been, a city that, perhaps, held the missing pieces of her story. The train station around her was a blur of hurried footsteps and cold metal benches. A flickering overhead light buzzed in the damp air, casting elongated shadows on the cracked tile floor. The smell of wet pavement and diesel filled her lungs. She tightened her grip on the letter, heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and fear. With a deep breath, she boarded the midnight train, chasing the ghost of a past that refused to let her go. The train rattled forward, its wheels grinding against the steel tracks as it carved through the storm-laden night. The rhythmic clatter of the rails matched the restless beat of Ava's thoughts. She sat by the window, staring out at the passing darkness, her breath fogging up the glass. Across from her, an elderly woman in a thick, moth-eaten shawl knitted absently, her fingers moving with the ease of routine. A man in a wrinkled suit dozed off in the corner, his newspaper slipping to the floor. The carriage smelled of damp wool, faded dreams, and the exhaustion of passengers running from something or chasing something, much like herself. She traced her fingers over the envelope once more. She had spent years convincing herself she didn't need answers, that she didn't need him. Yet here she was, chasing the shadow of a man she had only known through silence. The memories surfaced uninvited, the suffocating weight of unpaid bills. Eviction notices slipped under the door, her mother's tired hands gripping the steering wheel after long shifts. The nights when hunger gnawed at her stomach, when she lay staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering why she wasn't enough for him to stay. And now, after all this time, a letter. A single letter. As if words on a page could change everything. The train thundered through the countryside, slicing through the night like a blade. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the distant hills for a brief second before plunging them back into shadow. Ravensbrook awaited. When Ava stepped off the train, Ravensbrook greeted her with mist and mystery. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, leaving the cobblestone streets slick beneath flickering gaslights. The city felt like something out of an old novel. Its towering buildings loomed with history, their windows dark and unreadable. She tightened her coat around her, the cold biting at her skin. The return address from the envelope led her to a small, weathered bookstore tucked between aging brick buildings. The sign above the door bore a name she recognized from the letter. A knot formed in her stomach as she hesitated, then pushed the door open. A bell jingled above her, the sound lost in the musty air. The scent of aged paper and ink wrapped around her like an embrace. The dim glow of old-fashioned lamps illuminated the rows of books stacked like silent sentinels, their spines worn with time. Behind the counter, an elderly man with silver-threaded hair and eyes like dying embers looked up from a ledger. "You look just like him," he murmured, his voice edged with something between regret and relief. Ava's breath caught in her throat. "You knew my father?" He nodded, reaching beneath the counter. With careful hands, he slid a tattered journal across the wood. "He left this for you." Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. The ink-stained words filled the paper, some hurried, others carefully written. They painted a picture of a man she had never known. Her father had been a whistleblower, a man who had uncovered a truth so dangerous that powerful people had wanted it buried. He had vanished, not out of neglect, but to protect her, to keep her safe. Tears blurred the ink as a mix of anger and longing twisted in her chest. All these years she had believed she was abandoned, but in reality, She had been protected. Then why now? Why had the letter reached her after all these years? As if in answer, the bell above the door jingled. 2 men in dark suits stepped inside. Their movements were deliberate, their eyes scanning the store with cold calculation. The old man's face paled. "Run," he whispered. The streets of Ravensbrook became a maze of shadows and rain as Ava ran. Her lungs burned as she weaved through the alleys, her boots splashing through puddles. She clutched the journal tight against her chest, the weight of its secrets pressing into her ribs. Behind her, the men pursued relentlessly, their footsteps heavy against the wet stone. She darted through a marketplace, knocking over wooden crates in her desperation to slow them down. Vendors shouted in protest as produce spilled onto the pavement, but she didn't look back. A side street loomed ahead, leading to an old industrial district. She took it. The scent of rust and oil filled her nostrils as she burst into an abandoned warehouse. Moonlight filtered through shattered windows, casting jagged shadows along the walls. Footsteps echoed behind her. "You were never meant to find this," a voice called out. She turned, chest heaving. One of the men stepped from the darkness, his expression unreadable. "You could walk away now," he said, voice eerily calm. "Pretend none of this ever happened." Ava's grip tightened around the journal. "And live with knowing the truth?" The man sighed. "Then you leave us no choice." The fight was swift, brutal. A scuffle of bodies in the dim light. She ducked, using the element of surprise, knocking over rusted barrels and dodging heavy blows. Her body screamed in protest, but she had spent a lifetime surviving hardship. She had fought hunger, loneliness, the crushing weight of uncertainty. This was just another battle. She grabbed a rusted pipe and swung. The impact sent one of the men sprawling. Gasping, she bolted for the exit. By the time she reached the train station, dawn had begun to paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson. The night's storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and new. She clutched the journal to her chest, a testament to a father's sacrifice and a truth that could no longer be silenced. The battle wasn't over. The men in suits would come for her again. The forces her father had fought against would not let the truth slip away so easily. But she wasn't running anymore. She was fighting back. As the train pulled away, she watched Ravensbrook fade into the horizon. The past had haunted her for years, but now she carried it with purpose. She had spent her whole life believing she was abandoned. Now she understood. She had been protected. And now it was her turn to protect the truth.